Welcome back to Shat on TV American Gods, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the Starz series American Gods. I'm your host, Gene Lyons, and this is our deep dive edition where we look back and offer our thoughts and research, plus the top listener voicemail for the week. This week we'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 5 of American Gods, Sister Rising. And before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to our Twitch stream at shatontv.com/Twitch, where you can catch us live. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, at shatthemovies.com. And speaking of our sister podcast, we have been struck with calamity this week, and I believe it has to do with the movie we're covering on Shat the Movies, The Final Countdown. So for those of you familiar with Shat the Movies, you know that we do 80s and 90s movie reviews over there with Ash and our buddy Big D. And it seems like we've been struck with the curse of The Final Countdown. As we were recording the episode, Ash, on Valentine's Day, lost her internet. When we went to try to grab the files from that recording, we discovered we only had 12 minutes from the hour of recording that we did. So we knew we'd have to record it all over again. When we tried to record it all over again, the entire state of Texas lost power, and that's where Ash lives. So she had to go hole up in a hotel with no internet access. And then today, Big D injured his back and ended up in the hospital. So we couldn't finish that recording, and Ash couldn't join me for this recording. So that leaves me, Gene, to bring you this pod. But on the bright side, the episode of American Gods was solid and did some pretty smart things that deserve our attention. So rather than skip a week because everything had basically gone wrong, we're going to keep trudging through. And we even got a voicemail from Ash, who will not let a storm stop her from bringing her American Gods thoughts to you. So I wanted to start off with where the episode starts off, another great origin story. And this time we get the origin story for Technical Boy. We see ourselves at the World's Fair in Chicago, and we get this great opening song, which many of you will recognize as Susie and the Banshees' Hong Kong Garden. People are really confused about Hong Kong Garden and some of the imagery that we saw at the World's Fair too, with, you know, the Asian dancers. People might have thought the song sounds kind of racist, and in a sense, yeah. So Susie Sue, iconic new wave artist, she's living in England, and she has this local Chinese restaurant, and skinheads are coming through and just harassing, you know, the owners and the patrons of this restaurant. So she wrote this song, Hong Kong Garden, about the way that they behave inside the restaurant. So there are racist overtones, but it's representing the opinions of these skinheads. I'm talking racist skinheads, not good guy skinheads. But it sets up this notion of xenophobia and a fear of the other, where we see kind of worlds clashing, which when we think of the World's Fair, we think of all the positives, but a lot of people don't consider the negatives. And one of those negatives is these cultures clashing and people being othered. And one of those people is Tech Boy. So he's misfiled his application for the World's Fair. So instead of being able to show his inventions with the inventors, he ends up being instead put out there with the general entertainment, amongst illusionists and dancers and pugilists, not having the great time. But he's gathering up a little bit of a crowd, and they want to see this automaton that he's built. So at this point, Tech Boy, just a guy, and he's dedicated himself and invested his life savings into the pursuit of these mechanical feats. And he has the vision of where machinery and technology will go, but he can't demonstrate all the capabilities just yet, right? So all he's done is invented this machine that can write a single message as a prototype. The crowd that gathers does not share the same imagination as he does. They're just people. And so they eventually abandon him because his machine can't do anything else. And he encounters this guy, Maximilian, who's an illusionist. And Maximilian basically tells him that you got to fake it until you make it. As you might imagine, this is where bad blood really begins between Tech Boy and humans, and Tech Boy and the old gods. So with humans, their vision cannot match his. They don't see where he is going, and he sees himself as superior to them as they become increasingly reliant on him, becoming a new god. With Maximilian, he's a trickster, right? He's an illusionist. The way that he betrays and fools Tech Boy and takes advantage of Tech Boy to draw the crowd back to his own tent generates a bit of resentment. So it's reasonable to believe that among the old gods, being so many tricksters, that Tech Boy has a dislike for them from this genesis, in particular, Odin. But the parallels don't stop there in the past. They really continue to today. This is some smart writing in showing us some of the tactics and some of the truths that still exist in our digital world, especially with startups, especially with lean startups. And as a digital marketer myself, I totally see some of the tools that we use being displayed here in really subtle ways. So Maximilian's advice to Tech Boy is to advertise the things that you can't necessarily deliver on yet to build up support for the thing that you someday can deliver. And we do that today in marketing. There's a concept called the painted door, where you build a website that offers a service or a product, but you don't have that product or that service. And the entire idea is to see how many people are interested in it. And if you see a lot of people, you tell them something like, give us your email address and name, and you'll be among the first to test it out. Or give us your contact information, and we'll let you know when it's available. But the thing doesn't exist. And if not enough people are interested, it never will. Or if it never becomes technically feasible, then it never develops. We're just feeling you out. Politicians do this all the time with the idea of the trial balloon, right? You float some stuff out to the press, you see how it goes over with the audience. If the public seems to like it, then you start pushing forward with that legislation. If the public doesn't like it, it was never your idea. It's just something that got leaked to the press, right? And even what Tech Boy is doing by crawling into that machine is something that has been done before and is being done now. So back around 1770, there was this thing called the Mechanical Turk. And basically what it was allegedly this automaton, this machine that could play chess, which we see him doing in this episode. And what actually was going on was a person would crawl inside of the Mechanical Turk. It was called Mechanical Turk because on the top it looked like a caricature of a Turkish person who was very mystical or whatever, but a machine. And it would be playing chess, but it was really somebody inside of it that was doing it. And that went on from the 1770s to the mid 1800s, so actually predating the Chicago World's Fair. So it's not even a new idea in this flashback. But the Mechanical Turk isn't dead. If you were to Google the term Mechanical Turk, chances are you'd actually see Amazon Mechanical Turk. That's alive and well, and companies do this, most notably Amazon, where they take a function that a computer just doesn't do quite well yet or doesn't do at scale at a low price yet, and they assign that job to people. And these people basically, they sometimes call themselves Turks even. Basically, their job is to simulate the behavior of a machine. So there might be a thing where as a company, you want to test out a piece of software, or you want to log a bunch of addresses, or read road signs that a machine is having trouble reading. So all those things actually are dished out from Amazon Mechanical Turk as little jobs, and they get paid, a penny or 3 cents or whatever per interaction. And they'll do that all day long on these giant, basically human farms where hundreds, if not thousands of crunchers will be operating on tablets and computers, just doing one task over and over again. And at the end of the episode, after Tech Boy realizes that he can't rescue Bilquis, that he's essentially glitching out and unneeded, we see him retire to this space age looking warehouse where that automaton head is now connected to a little box that seems to be hooked up to some hydraulics on a grid. And if it doesn't look familiar to you, it's probably because you've never toured a laser-guided warehouse. When I lived in Ohio, I had the opportunity to tour a Procter & Gamble facility, and they had these laser-guided warehouses that also have machine learning. And basically the way this operates is, you no longer do you have the forklift operator in a well-lit warehouse, a highly skilled trade that's a union job, and that person has to go down the aisles they know, where things are organized the way a human would understand organization, and pull that pallet and go deliver it to a truck that's coming. Instead, these laser-guided warehouses operate in the dark because the automated lifts don't need any light to see. They also don't need anything to be organized in a way a human would understand. So there's an algorithm constantly rewriting which goods get packaged in which way, in which order the pallets are brought off, how they're stacked up. It doesn't make sense to you or me, but it makes sense to the machine. And when a truck is coming inbound from that Walmart or that Target, it already can anticipate what the order is going to be, deliver all that to the dock, all automated, in the dark, laser guided, machine controlled. And that's what we're seeing here, that this is the eventual evolution from that starting point of that automaton that could just write one single message to this entire complex facility that operates essentially on its own. Shifting over from Tech Boy, we then in this episode rejoin Mr. Wednesday and learn a little bit more about what he's up to. Now, in prior podcasts, we thought that Wednesday had actually had his brains perhaps scrambled by this explosion. Maybe Marilyn Manson was a werewolf that blew him up. Now we see, in fact, that Wednesday is up to his old tricks again. He is now in the care facility along with Demeter, and he's hooked up to chlorpromazine, which is a drug used to treat psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia or manic depression. So the doctors here have taken the bait. They believe he needs to be kept in this care facility. And we realize that Wednesday is just using this situation to get himself closer to Demeter and convince her to join his cause. Now, he also wants to get Demeter out of this facility, and to do that, he needs help from Shadow and Cordelia. So they pull off number 37. So if you recall, Shadow and Mr. Wednesday from their early days in American Gods had numbered cons, and 37 is a specific con that they're going to pull off to be able to access the accounts of and blackmail Demeter's appointed conservator. And so Shadow and Cordelia spring into action. We get a little Ocean's 11 sort of montage there, a little bit of fun, a little bit of flair on the episode. Very reminiscent, I thought, of Westworld Season 3, where we got into a little bit of like that spy action. Admittedly, some parts of it were really cool. Other parts, like why Cordelia was walking down the hallway all super weird, I can't really quite explain. But the point is that we understand now what Wednesday is up to. And we got to see Shadow again doing something a little cool. Like his character's getting to have a little bit of fun. There's a little panache, a little swagger there. And they pull it off. And now they have access to funding. And they also have a means by which to get Demeter out of the care facility in a few days. Now, as promised, I have a voicemail from Ash, which is going to carry us into the next topic.
Hey guys, Ashley Schlafly here, calling you from the absolute frigid tundra that is Houston, Texas at the moment. We're in day 4 of our snowpocalypse, and I'm super bummed that I can't be with Jean today on the podcast to talk about all things American Gods episode 5, because this episode, y'all, I absolutely loved it. I really could go on and on about so many things, from that Ocean's 11 style heist to the origins of Tech Boy, which I can't wait to dive more into, but I'm quite sure that Jean has all of that under control. So I thought I would talk about the one piece that would have been my big topic for the deep dive, and I'll keep it brief, but basically I want to talk about the beauty of Bilquis's scenes this week and the fact that she finally broke free in so many ways, both literally and metaphorically. I have not been silent, both when I used to just write in as well as when I've been doing coverage with Jean this season, about how problematic I think a lot of Bilquis as a character has been. I think that beginning with season 1, they've turned her really into more of a Jezebel character than I think really is appropriate. I think it's incredibly problematic for lots of reasons, most importantly because she's a woman of color, and it has done nothing but reinforce some negative stereotypes and over-sexualize women in a way that Black women of color, starting as young girls, are over-sexualized in a variety of media. But here, I feel like we get a payoff and we get a redemption, not just of the character, but of the showrunners as well, with what they're doing with Bilquis. So we all know what happens in the series. She breaks out. She breaks free from this cell that she's been kept in since last week. And what I love about it is Shadow is there and Tech Boy's there to save her, but Bilquis is no damsel in distress. She is able to save herself. And I actually kind of cheered out loud when she walked out of that cube of water that she creates and finds herself within. And at that moment, I think she proves she's a motherfucking goddess right there. She is the old god that we've been hoping she would be from the beginning of the series. And what I think is so beautiful about this is that with the help of the Orishas, she is seeing herself for who she is and not who people have told her that she is. They've told her that she's a predator. They've told her that she is going to be an individual or a god or goddess that is going to consume, that is going to devour, that's the role she's been cast in. But in truth, that's not her true identity. That's the identity that's been superimposed upon her. And while, of course, we can go with the person of color narrative narrative that we're seeing all throughout this series. As a woman, and I'm not a person of color, but as a woman, I certainly could relate to this in terms of what it is like as a woman to be told what my role is and what my limitations should be. And I thought it was this beautiful concept that she is the giver of life. That's what they tell her. She's not a consumer. She's not a predator. She's not this over-sexualized problem. She is the giver of life. And I think that for her to find this potential and for her to drown out all of the noise, literally and figuratively, and find her true self, I think it's beautiful. And when you have that clear intention as a woman and you realize truly the possibility of all that you're able to do, that's the most dangerous weapon against the patriarchy. It's the most dangerous weapon that we have against the systems that oppress us. That intentionality, when we find that in ourselves and we realize the power we all possess within ourselves, that's when the patriarchy falls. That's when systems of systemic racism fall. It's when we claim our power. And I also really love the irony of her taking back her life and her proving this using the element of life, the giver of life, water. She uses that to kill those who would drown her out, and she emerges from it in a way reborn and renewed with this spiritual awakening. And I'm really excited to see where this goes. I'm really excited to see where Bilquis takes us throughout the rest of the season. And come on. Greatest line of the whole episode. The journey to spiritual awakening is better with French fries. I could not agree more. French fries make everything better. And what made this episode great is that finally we've got a goddess that we've been waiting for. We've got a goddess that's deserving of the source material. And I'm pretty excited to talk it over with you guys in the coming weeks. So anybody from Texas, stay safe, stay warm. Jean, thanks so much for holding it down by yourselves. So long from Houston. Hopefully we have power, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Ash, for that message. Dedicated as always. Middle of a snowstorm, no power, no heat, a family to take care of, and what does she think of? Old Jean Lyons and the listeners at Shat on TV. Ash mentioned her favorite quote out of the scene, and I had a slightly different one that resonated really strongly with me, and that was Bilquis's line, "I was the exotic fantasy in the minds of others." And we're seeing this across the board with characters in American Gods, but most powerfully with Bilquis. They are redefining the character, and it is so smart, and it really made me consider how I consume TV. A lot of times we get dragged into these static positions, especially as people who review TV, that a character's not being true to the character, or the character isn't true to the book. And in this case, it's really flipping that concept on its head and saying, is what we've been told about any of these characters accurate to what that person or that character would really be like, right? And it's another example of American Gods exploring race and othering, as Ash mentioned, through a more natural and lived-in character. We've never related to Bilquis before because Bilquis wasn't a person. She was a caricature. And what's really cool about old gods, if you look back in African culture, if you look back in Middle Eastern culture, if you look back in Greco-Roman culture, is that these old gods were very human. They had our flaws. They had our humanity. I talked on multiple episodes now about how Zeus was a real motherfucker, you know? And yeah, he was. Odin, kind of a dick. He's a shitbag. Why? Because of their human qualities. And we've seen this with Shadow too. Like, think of Shadow Moon in the first 2 seasons. There wasn't a person there. The best characters are the ones that you know so well, like they're an old friend, like they're fleshed out with all their flaws and all their idiosyncrasies and all the fun that you can have with them and all the times that you're frustrated with them. And now we've gotten a Shadow Moon who likes some people and dislikes some people. It's not like where Shadow Moon would just kind of stare at things and sneer sometimes. Here we have a guy who has his own curiosity, and he's freed himself from the original definition of the character according to stars, the character according to the first 2 seasons, who was very sterile, rather uninteresting, frankly, and wasn't using Ricky Whittle to his full potential. We made the mistake of thinking it was a Ricky Whittle problem. I really do think it was an American Gods problem. And before we close out, I did want to catch up on some odds and ends. Again, if you'd like to write into us, with reactions to anything you heard on this edition of Shat on TV, or any ideas that you have out there on your own. Please write us, host at shatontv.com, or call 914-719-SHAT. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a couple of things that Laura Moon did in this episode that just really got me. Again, first 2 seasons, wasn't a big Laura Moon fan, really digging her now. And she had this line about what all happened with the Gree, Mad Sweeney, and her going to purgatory and coming back. And she just explains it as, look, it's fucking voodoo, man. Nobody knows how that shit works. Yeah, and yeah, it in a sense, it does marginalize an actual belief system, but what they're getting at is this is TV voodoo, right? It's a self-aware show saying, listen, don't get caught in the logistics of it. Just enjoy the storytelling aspect of it. And part of that storytelling is Laura's giving us some really profound viewpoints on death and what happens after you die. And as she's talking to Salim, she points out that death is forever. And when we think of that, I know I personally think of my life and I think of death, and I think of them as part of a continuum, but I never really consider the fact that life is so finite and death is forever. The way Laura says it is basically, when you think you've been dead forever, you're just getting started. There is no end to it. And fuck, guys, I got to tell you, that made me freeze everything I was doing and really take stock of my notion of death. So the show's finding ways to be profound while still being flippant and keeping Laura true to her character. And the only other thing I wanted to point out was this great phone scene where we have Mike, Shadow Moon, calling Marguerite over the phone, and he's on a payphone in the city, and she is on a landline in her apartment. I hadn't seen those 2 items in such a long time, and I thought I was the only one who kind of caught that. But apparently, no, the American Gods got called out on social media, and they responded to it with these great candid photos. By the way, if you're not following them on Twitter and Instagram, they're doing a phenomenal job this year with the social media. But there are these great candid shots behind the scenes, and I found myself really grinning and just enjoying the cast of this show, and finding myself really enjoying the show itself. But their whole point was, yes, this is a real payphone. They do exist. And I was sitting here thinking that Shadow just found the ability, his god ability was conjuring payphones. Nope, it's a real phone. Anyway, thanks you guys so much for listening. That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed and will join us next week for more. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcasts. The website is shatontv.com. You can email us at host@shatontv.com, or as I mentioned, call us with a voicemail. We love those at 914-719-SHAT. Also, join us on our Twitch stream, shatontv.com/Twitch. Even if you don't like watching Twitch, you can use your Amazon Prime subscription to subscribe to us on Twitch Prime, and that gives Shat on TV and Shat the Movies podcast a little bit of financial support each month. It doesn't cost you anything. It is an added benefit of your Amazon Prime membership. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we join our good friend Big D, Dick Ebert, and his busted up back to cover 80s and 90s movies commissioned by you, the listeners. I shouldn't make fun of it, guys. He was actually in the hospital. He's okay now. I mean, he's in a lot of pain, but you can find past and future episodes at shatthemovies.com, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-host, Ash Schlafly in the frozen tundra of Houston, Texas, and Big D, Dick Ebert, out there lying flat on his back in sunny Florida, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for Season 3, Episode 6 of American Gods, Conscience of the King. As always, take care, mask up, vaccinate, and stay the fuck at home.